Welcome back to the channel, you curd nerds. Today is another episode of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge broken down in plain English, where we're going to break things down Barney style for you, so that you can get everything you need out of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge without turning it into a pillow. Today, we're going to talk about aircraft classification, ultralight vehicles, and even the certificates that you can get through your aviation journey. But before we get into that, I've read through the comments. Y'all are amazing. I love the words of encouragement. If you've got any questions, please leave them down in the comments and we'll cover them at the beginning of every episode. And if you do enjoy this content, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you get notified every time we come out with a new episode. Now let's get into it. The FAA, they love their categories and subcategories almost as much as I love free snacks. And for good reason. Just because you know how to fly a Cessna doesn't mean you are good to go fly a Zeppelin. Doesn't mean you're good to go fly a gyrocopter. It doesn't mean that you are good to go hop in any different aircraft that'll take you up into the air. So let's talk about how aircraft are classified and what this means for what you can and can't fly. So big picture, big wide picture, looking straight from the top, big wide picture. The FAA is going to split the aircraft up into how they fly and what makes them stay in the air. These broad labels are called categories, and they help determine what type of pilot certificate you're going to need to operate these aircraft. Airplanes. These are heavier than air, engine-driven aircraft where the wings' interaction with the surrounding air is what causes them to get up in the air. Think Cessna 172, Piper Cherokee, Airbus A320, Boeing 747. These are all airplanes. They definitely weigh more than the air that surrounds them. They definitely won't fly without the engine that's attached to them. And, well, they definitely need the wings, or else they ain't gonna fly. Next, lighter than air. It's exactly how the name sounds. They are lighter than the surrounding air. These aircraft stay aloft by holding gas that's lighter than the air around it. Think hot air balloons, gas balloons like helium or, heaven forbid, hydrogen. We saw how well that went. And the Goodyear blimp. Obviously, if you know how to fly a Cessna, it's not really going to be the same when it comes to flying a hot air balloon, right? Up next is going to be powered lift. These are heavier than air machines that can take off and land vertically and can scoot forward, usually at lower flight speeds. They're engine powered, but not technically rotary wing. These would be things like a jetpack or the V-22 Osprey. I know technically the Osprey's got rotors, but it still falls under the powered lift category. Some other things that would maybe fall under the powered lift category would be those multi-rotor 2 seats that you've been seeing at Oshkosh and Sun and Fun recently. Up next is powered parachute. I've seen these things. I don't want to fly them. They have a soft, flexible wing that doesn't get ready to produce lift. It doesn't produce any lift. It has no ability to even be in an appropriate shape to produce lift until the vehicle is already rolling down the runway. Some of these look like lawn chairs with weed whackers strapped to the back of them. Other ones look like straight up all-terrain vehicles with multiple seats and a big old parachute attached to the top of them. I don't really want to fly something where the wing can just all of a sudden go, I'm done being a wing. But again, I've never flown one. They just look like a death trap to me. Next up is rockets. Yes, the FAA governs rockets. You can't just strap a bunch of those disposable solid rocket boosters to the end of a toilet paper tube and yeet it up into the air as high as it'll go. Especially if you start crossing like 400, 700, 1200 feet. But how do we define a rocket? It holds on to all of its fuel and oxidizer inside the unit. If it breathes outside air, it's not a rocket. A rocket throws expanding gases behind it based on a fuel and oxidizer that's held within the unit. Rotorcraft. These are technically split up into 2 different types. All right, we've got gyroplanes and helicopters. Helicopters are probably something that a lot of people are familiar with. We've all seen helicopters in movies. A helicopter, the rotor, the main rotor up on the top, is driven by the engine the whole time. The engine is either attached with gears, belts, clutches, what have you. Either way, the engine drives the main rotor, and it's responsible for both lift and forward thrust. Gyroplanes, on the other hand, the rotor up top, it spins freely. Some of them can momentarily be powered on the ground, but for the most part, they spin freely as they react with the relative wind. When they react with the relative wind, they start rotating, and that disk area they create is what produces the lift. They have a separate propeller that pushes you forward. Now, last up, these are going to be weight shift control aircraft. These are going to be steered by moving your body or pivoting the wing in relation to the center of gravity. Think powered hang glider. Again, some of these might look like all-terrain vehicles with a hang glider attached to the back and some propeller on the rear. I'd probably get in one of these. They look kind of cool. The FAA continues to break down aircraft based on weight or size. We've got large aircraft. These are things greater than 12,500 pounds. They're going to require a type rating, which is the FAA's fancy speak for you're going to need a new check ride and a bunch more training and a lot more money. We're going to talk about type ratings in a little bit. Next up is going to be small aircraft. These are anything under 12,500 pounds. Most general aviation aircraft are going to fall into this bucket. This could range anywhere from a Cessna 150 all the way up to technically a King Air 90. Beyond that, we've got light sport aircraft. These are meant for sport pilots. Again, we're going to talk about what sport pilots are in a little bit. But they've got a max takeoff weight of 1,320 pounds. Unless it floats, then we could take that up to 1,430 pounds. The max speed is going to be 120 knots in level flight with a stall speed no greater than 45 knots. Can't carry more than 2 people, including a passenger. No turbofans, no turbojets. They can only be a single engine. And if it's powered, it has to have fixed gear. If it's a glider, it's a little different. The smallest type of aircraft would be an ultralight. These, they have to weigh less than 254 pounds if they're powered. If they're unpowered, you can cut that all the way down to less than 155 pounds. No passengers, no flying at night, but also no license, no medical. You really just hop in and fly. Of course, I recommend go and get actual training. Don't just go buy an ultralight and go, woo! You know, that's how you get hurt, all right? But these can sometimes be a little more than a glorified kite with a motor. So stay safe out there, and if you want to look up more on ultralights, go check out part 103, or leave some questions in the comments, and I'll make another video about ultralights. Now, we can break it down by classes. All right, so categories, these were those big overarching ideas, airplanes, weight shift control, rotorcraft, stuff like that. Then we can break it down even more to things like single engine, multi-engine. Does it land on the land? Does it land on the sea? Is it a multi-engine sea? Is it a multi-engine land? Helicopter, gyroplane, airship, free balloon. These are all examples of classes. Now, you can mix these up, you can mix and match. You don't technically need one or the other. I actually had a student, 2-3 years ago, that they got their private pilot certificate in a single engine seaplane. They never touched the land, but they got their private pilot certificate in it. And then they shifted straight over to multi-engine land. Then they went and got their ATP. Then they went and got a 707 type, then an A320 type, then a 737, then a 747, then an A350. And by the time they retired, they had all these types on their multi-engine land ATP certificate. But at no point had they ever thought to maybe get their single engine land. That's right. This individual was qualified to carry passengers and cargo across the oceans in giant jumbo jets, but if you would have asked them to go fly your Cessna 172, they were not qualified to do so. So at the ripe old age of 68, me, with less time in my entire aviation career than this individual had in the flare, got to teach him how to put a Cessna 172 on the ground. To be honest, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. I think we got it done in like 15 hours. But let's talk about certificates. This is what you're going to get to show that you know how to actually fly this aircraft, right? The smallest requirement, other than Part 103, which is no requirement, is a sport pilot certificate. This is a 20-hour requirement. 15 has to be with an instructor. 5 has to be solo. Of course, these are the minimums. Most people take more, right? But they are going to be limited to light sport aircraft, like we talked about earlier, that 1,320 pounds or the 1,430 pounds or what have you. They are VFR or visual flight rules only, daytime only, no Class B, no Class D, no Class C, without an endorsement. And again, as we said earlier, 3-mile visibility is the minimum. They are a great low-cost way to start flying legally. Since you got to build 1,500 hours to get to the airlines anyway, why not start at Sport Pilot, start flying like something with a Rotax burning 5 gallons of 88 octane fuel at $15 an hour, as opposed to dropping $200 an hour on a Cherokee 140, right? Next up is going to be recreational pilot. This is a 30-hour minimum requirement. They can't carry more than 1 passenger, can't fly aircraft with more than 4 seats, and their range can be limited unless, again, they get appropriate endorsements. It's not super common, especially because it's only a 10-hour reduction from the private pilot requirements. Private pilot now. This is where most people start out. Unless money's a real big concern, most people are going to go straight to private pilot. If you go to a Part 141 school, which again, we're going to talk about in a later episode, the minimum hour requirement is 35. I had one student in my years of instruction that accomplished their private pilot certificate in like 35.3 hours. I have signed off more students than I care to count, and I have had one. If you're going to go Part 61, the minimum requirement is 40 hours. The national average is closer to 70. I got my private pilot certificate in 117. So if you're working through your private pilot certificate right now and you're crossing these numbers, don't get discouraged, okay? But private pilots have a whole lot less restrictions on them, right? They can fly at day, night, VFR, carry passengers, fly across the country. The one big restriction, though, is they can't get paid, right? Just keep that in mind. We'll talk about privileges and limitations in another episode, but private pilots cannot get paid. The next certificate that you're probably going to go for is going to be your commercial pilot certificate. This has a minimum of 250 hours. You can start getting paid, but you're still not ready for the airlines. This is things like banner towing, ferry flights, pipeline patrol, search and rescue, aerial photography. So it's not just about building the hours. It's really about polishing your stick and rudder skills to perfection. That's where a lot of people really learn how to fly an airplane. They get taught new maneuvers when going into commercial pilot, and then they go and practice these commercial maneuvers. And it really helps you work on the smoothness and those stick and rudder skills that you really need when you start getting into bigger and faster airplanes. Next one is going to be your ATP certificate. Some people go get their flight instructor, some people go straight to ATP. But the ATP certificate, this is your, proverbial golden ticket if you want to go fly airliners, right? You've got a minimum of 1,500 hours. It's required on whether or not you're going to be a first officer or captain at an airline, and it's typically paired with a type rating nowadays. Years ago, you'd go get your ATP in like a Seminole or a Twin Comanche or an Aztec or something like that, or a Cessna 340. Nowadays, you're getting your ATP as part of your 320 or your 737 type rating. Now, type ratings. This is where things get a little bit more interesting. A type rating is required for aircraft that are either over 12,500 pounds, turbojet, turbofan powered, or just complex and weird enough for the FAA to go, nah, you gonna need to learn a couple more things before you go fly that on your own. Imagine needing a separate driver's license for every different car model. So let's say your first driver's license was for a Volkswagen Beetle or a Toyota Prius, right? And then you wanted to go drive a truck. So you had to go get a truck rating. Now you want to go drive an F-150. So go get your F-150 rating. Now you want to drive a 250 or a 450 or a 650. To be honest, if you're trying to drive anything over an F-350, you should probably get more training anyway, but it's not required. For example, with me, I've got a CL65 type rating, an A320 type rating, and an Embraer 145 type rating. The CL65 type rating allows me to fly the CRJ200 and technically the business jet CL65. The A320 allows me to fly the 318, the 319, the 320, and the 321 because all of these technically operate close enough that the FAA goes, yeah, sure, you're good to operate that. That's kind of why the 737's been having so many problems recently because they're trying to get it to fit under the original type rating. Now, there are some hour reductions that are available for this ATP certificate if you want to get your restricted ATP. I think the military, it's restricted down to 750. I think if you go to specific colleges, you can get 1,000 or 1,250. But for just general knowledge, 1,500 hours is the minimum. Now, how are we going to build those hours? Well, most people go and get their certified flight instructor certificate. This is how I built my time. This is how a lot of my friends built their time. They became a certified flight instructor. Now, a lot of people view it as just that stepping stone to build hours, but it's not something to be taken lightly. You're responsible for shaping the next generation of pilots. You'll be flying right alongside them in the same airspace. So please don't treat them like a quick way to get hours and a pass to the airlines. Train your students well. Next we've got is some add-on ratings. These are going to give you more privileges than just the base certificates. So we've got our instrument rating. This allows you to fly in the clouds. You're going to need this if you want to operate commercially. You're definitely going to need it if you want to be a flight instructor or an airline pilot. Then you've got your multi-engine rating. If you want to fly something with more than one engine, you're going to need a multi-engine rating. Seaplane rating. I absolutely recommend this to everybody, even though it's entirely useless unless you want to go buy your own seaplane because nobody will rent you a seaplane. And I don't know of any seaplane commercial operators that are really hurting for people. I know Kenmore is technically hiring if you really want to build seaplane time. Then you've got some endorsements, things like tail wheel endorsement. If you want to go fly a Cub, you're going to need an endorsement if the wheel is on the tail. High performance endorsements. Another one, if you want to go fly something that's got a little bit more scoochums than 150 horsepower, well, it's technically over 200 horsepower, you're going to need a high performance endorsement. Once we start getting into complex airplanes with retractable gear and constant speed props and flaps, then you're going to need a complex endorsement. You want to fly above 18,000 feet in a general aviation airplane? Congratulations, you're going to need a high altitude endorsement. Each one of these are usually going to come with more training. All of the ratings are going to come with another check ride. The endorsements are exactly that. They're just endorsements. An instructor that has that endorsement can usually provide that endorsement. So, to wrap things up, I know that was a lot of info, and you're probably sitting there thinking, I need to know all of this before I even start looking for a flight school? Yeah, that's kind of the point. These first few episodes, they're going to set the groundwork. They're really going to set you with a base knowledge before you start walking into flight schools. I know when I started my flight training journey, I had no idea what any of this meant. I didn't even know the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge was a thing when I started looking for flight schools. I didn't know what 141 was. I didn't know what Part 61 was, 91, endorsements, funding options. I had no idea. So let me help you avoid all of that lost in the sauce feelings with this podcast. Coming up next, though, on the next episode, we're going to talk about how to pick the right flight school. What's the difference between 141 and Part 61? What's some red flags you should be out on the look for? And how do you know your CFI is actually going to teach you and not just sit there and watch you mess up? If you've got any questions from today's episode, please drop them in the comments below and I'll make sure to answer them at the start of the next episode. And until then, as always, fly safe, stay sharp, and keep it cheesy.